was called Creative Object Model. And in that, we were trying to build a new standard, a new way to fine tune AI models with sort of private data, with your personal data. For example, you could take your, let's say, beats and create a custom fine tune, like how you create a zip file.
Can you use a global payments layer which allows anyone to procure data, to train a model, also potentially devise other kinds of DeFi mechanics to allow people to have monthly incomes, if possible? That's the vision that we have. OpenAI recently lost all of its API keys, like the 10 million open API keys are there in the public. So which means that a big company like OpenAI can also get the database data stolen. But again, the interesting bit about the blockchain is that if the smart contract is secure, you can be relatively assured that it's secure for everyone and publicly secured. That's the most important thing, right? As more technology emerges, I think it'll become very easy for the user to trace their data's life cycle, right? Without having to depend on governments to come up with data privacy.
Welcome to the XDC India Podcast. I'm your host, KishanBaalaji, and today we're diving into one of the biggest technical challenges in Web3, data ownership, tokenization, and decentralized identity. So we have an amazing panel of guests from the projects building real solutions in this space. Let's begin by understanding the people behind these innovations. An introduction of yourself, please.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I've been a serial entrepreneur, been building startups since a decade now. And I see drums behind you, also very much into music as well. So also been making some music like when I was in college. And of course, been doing tech as well, and got into blockchain in 2016. So I was looking at things around blockchain, and Ethereum came up, and it was quite fascinating that now you could build things on chain, and the whole concept of dApps and decentralized applications was quite intriguing for me. So that's how I got into blockchain space. And if you reverse block, BLOCK becomes KCOLB. Luckily, Kcolbchain.com was available, so I just took it, and that's how my journey started. And yes, I've been with startups pretty much since my final year in college. Multiple startups over the years in brain training, games. I started with neuroscience-based games, then a music tech app as well. Consulted some other startups as well. Was doing more like the technical founder role. But then, of course, I think the creative side of me took over, and I like to do more storytelling and growth aspect of it. And that's where it all brings my journey into sort of this current phase where I'm doing IPTO.ai and human data rights, where, of course, trying to bring all the creativity and blockchain and decade of startup experience together and building something meaningful and very relevant for the world now. So yeah, I think I'll keep it to that for now.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction. It feels good to know that another fellow musician is in the Web3 world. And to our next guest, who is Dipankar, could you please give us an introduction about yourself?
For sure. So my background is that I've always wanted to work with computers. So that means that for the last 20 odd years, I have been sort of just working with figuring out what you can do with computers. That's my thing. I really enjoy doing stuff with these machines. Now, my early background is that I studied computer science, and after that, I was very early startup employee, single-digit startup employee for a company called SlideShare. And then I worked in very early payment gateways, financial tech in India, which is 2007. So a lot of stuff was happening back then. And then e-commerce happened. So I was there in a lot of e-commerce companies as well. But my one true love in terms of building software is building social software. We with a few co-founders actually built one of India's first microblogging sites. And we were pretty large, as compared to Twitter, what is now X. We were the 5th largest in the world. And that was back in 2007. We were building this out of Delhi. Of course, back then, even today, I think India does not have any money for building social software. And we continue to be terrible at it. But at some point of time in 2007, we were were the top 5 in the world. An Indian company was top 5. So those are the kind of things that I really enjoy doing. But I think within the limited scope of what India could do, I think there was a lot of B2B SaaS things that I worked on. And then I think blockchain did happen, but I think the blockchain ecosystem in India has always had regulatory issues. So you can't really do anything in its entirety. So the good news is that in the last couple of years, I've been doing things outside of India. So it's given me a huge opportunity of working with people like Krishna and other folks who are really, really trying to do something interesting in the blockchain space. My interest in the blockchain space is typically I see it as a global payments rail. I think that there's a huge opportunity in terms of making certain things ubiquitous for everyone globally. And I think a lot of what Balaji Srinivasan talks about in terms of nation states being formed because of the existing infrastructure, the blockchain rails, I think that is all true. I think it's fascinating times, and it's a very good time to sort of be building in this space. And I think we're talking in terms of decade-long projects and not 6 months meme coin sort of projects. Everything has its time, but I think there are interesting projects to be built and scaled up in this particular phase of the internet. In terms of music, so music appreciation, by the way, I've seen the entire sort of music appreciation thing go from metal, death metal, all the things that Krishna talked about. I definitely am a listener. I would not say that I'm going to play any of those instruments. And I definitely think that I've ended up liking electronic a lot more. So I think it's a journey for all of us, surprisingly, for a lot of the decade-long lovers of hard rock, metal, everything. I think it somehow ends up not wanting to hear any lyrics. I don't know about anyone else, but I've reached that point where I'm like, wow, let's just play some chill step and chill out. And yeah, that's that.
So what inspired you to work in Web3? And what problem is your project solving?
So for me, like I said earlier, 2016, just the idea of building things without anyone's permission and like building the financial models around it, economic models, which are not sort of following the traditional norms, that was, I think, that was quite freeing. If you think about it, there's like an essence of freedom in terms of doing things in Web3. So that was quite powerful, I think, which drew me in early. And later, of course, over the years, of course, having built things in music technology space, and I was always intrigued about how sort of like the future of ownership or creativity looks like. That's where I built this project called Create Protocol in 2021, which is sort of like a precursor to what we are doing right now. And we built multi-chain NFT protocol, one of the first multi-chain NFT protocol, with a lot of other applications also leverage NFTs. And then, of course, there was this thought which was always there, that how do we think about human creativity in the post-AGI era? So this particular question is something which kept me up at night, and sort of like the answer to this question, the quest to find the answer to this question sort of led to what we are doing right now with IPTO AI. So sort of like bridging IPs and AI together. And around this, we built a few products. We published a research paper earlier last year. Me and Dipankar started collaborating with that particular research paper, and later we ended up co-founding IPTO.ai. So the research was mainly around creative object model. It was called Creative Object Model. And in that, we were trying to build a new standard, a new way to fine-tune AI models with sort of private data, with your personal data. For example, you could take your, let's say, beats and create a custom fine-tune, like how you create a zip file. But then while working on this and we rolled this out to people, we sort of like tried to simplify it further. When you build something, you make some complex layers, but we tried distilling it more and more and more. And that's where current IP to AI model comes in.
So I think that what Krishna said is absolutely how we've reached this point. But I think my perspective on this is not a blockchain perspective. My perspective on this is actually coming from how present AI models are being trained. And even if we reach AGI, in whatever form we reach AGI, the reality is that most of the data will come from non-authorized or non-copyright sources at this point of time. That's the reality. Now, is there a way in which we can ensure that everybody gets paid a fair share of wages or fair share of value or wealth for the work that they've put in generating this data? Because a lot of data gets generated. Even this podcast is data being generated. Even editing this podcast is data that's generated. Because we are constantly generating data, and that data might be useful, might not be useful. That's not a problem. But if it's being used to train a model that has commercial usage, and specifically commercial usage that leads to more wealth being generated, more value being generated, we should be rewarded for it. That's how it should be. Now, that's obvious, right? But the problem is that how do you take something that's that obvious and that's ubiquitous, but make it reality for everyone? One conjecture that we can make is that this will lead to some kind of universal basic income, because everybody's trying to do something useful. They're generating data, so that means everybody should get paid when the model gets used commercially, right? Now, that's what IPTO is the start point for, right? We believe that there should be something called human data rights. Human data rights should essentially cover this idea or this basic right of everyone to get compensated for the data they're generating for essentially feeding this massive AI models, right? We are feeding them. You can look at them as any structure, but essentially everything you're doing is feeding something much larger, which is basically regurgitating it back into something commercial, right? And the second part is that if it's a right, then how do you enforce such rights? We believe that to enforce a right that is essentially global in nature, it should be enforced by using the blockchain technology, which I think is very, very clear. It's a ubiquitous global financial transactional layer, plus also a way of linking back the fact that you have provided data or somebody's used your data to begin with, right? So provenance becomes a very big role to play in this. Of course, there are other sort of discussions around identity and so on and so forth. We can discuss a lot of other issues, but the crux of it is that can you use a global payments layer which is seemingly unregulated in most parts unless you go off-ramp, right? Which allows anyone to procure data, to train a model, and to essentially also potentially devise other kinds of DeFi mechanics to allow people to have monthly incomes, if possible, right? I mean, that's the vision that we have. And I think Krishna has done a great job explaining how we've reached this conclusion. It's a simplistic conclusion, but it's taken us a long time to reach this conclusion. I mean, like all other simple, obvious conclusions, it just takes a lot more time than you think, right? But we feel that this is the point in history when OpenAI, all these other players are focusing on working with larger content generators, but the long tail of content generators, which is us globally, right? There's no recourse for us. I think that is the larger gap for us. And that's what we really want to place ourselves in and then push for. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. This whole Web3 promises user control data, but how does that work at the protocol level?
So of course, like when we talk about data right now, there are I think 3 different kinds of data. One is what you already have out there in public, like for example on your YouTube channel or anything which you put out on Twitter. All this data is already being publicly shared, but the people sharing it are not making any money, or they're not being able to sort of get credit or being able to trace its use in AI. That's what sort of IPTO enables. So for that, anyways, the privacy aspect doesn't come into the picture. The second data is private data sitting on your computers, which you don't mind really making money from, but you don't want to put it out there in public. So for that, of course, like encryption technologies and the broader innovations being done in the crypto space on the infrastructure level, like ZK enables that, and we will be integrating some of that as well. And the third is, of course, like the kind of data which you really don't want anyone to come near to or give access to. So for that, you should keep it private and keep it encrypted. Keep it to yourself. I mean, even the encryption question doesn't really matter there.
Thank you so much. So how do smart contracts enable self-sovereign data ownership, and what are the risks that exist?
So smart contracts, essentially autonomous programs that are running on the blockchain, which means that we have very little control over the program once it's on the chain. It just operates by itself. We can of course upgrade it as the founding team, but in many cases, many teams do decide to sort of delete the keys that were used to sort of set up the program as well. As for ownership of the data, once the smart contract is on the chain, because the control is with the smart contract itself, whatever is encoded within the contract itself with respect to data ownership is what stands. So that means that the rules of the game are public. Anything that happens with the chain is public. So so fundamentally, in many cases, we would also get, let's say, security audits done of the program and then publish it, which means that you're again aware of how the program behaves. Are there issues with the program that can be, let's say, used by hackers to steal stuff? But purely from a technical perspective, it's not very different than an extremely sort of secure program you would want to use. Of course, there's a big difference with a smart contract and other sort of programs you use on the internet. Right? A program would be a website as well. The bigger difference is that sometimes it interacts with money, internet money, which means that you just need a few more safeguards in place. And all of those things are usually taken care of through security audits and just better programming in many cases, right? Or you also sort of devise the program in a way in which certain things can't happen at all. There are always risks. One can't deny them. You can't fully understand sometimes what a very complex program or website does. So Facebook can get hacked, Twitter can get hacked, websites do get hacked, even financial websites get hacked. OpenAI recently lost all of its API keys, like the 10 million open API keys are there in the public. So which means that a big company like OpenAI can also get the database data stolen. But again, the interesting bit about the blockchain is that if the smart contract is secure, you can be relatively assured that it's secure for everyone and publicly secured. That's the most important thing, right? So OpenAI would be privately secured or privately unsecured, or as compared to, let's say, IPTO AI being completely publicly secured. Like if it's there, it's out there in the public. So those are the sort of major differences to think about when you think about like security on the chain and smart contracts.
Thank you so much for that succinct, explanation about, self-sovereign data ownership. And the next question that I would like to kind of dig through is, how do zero knowledge proofs or ZKPs enhance data privacy without sacrificing usability? Is this something that you guys are using in your software or in your programming, or what are your thoughts on this?
So I think ZKP is going to have tremendous impact in the digital identity space. It's already becoming very clear. I think there are centralized players like Microsoft who are using some form of ZKP. We would of course go ahead and use ZKP solutions for our end consumers as we keep building this out. At this point in time, we don't, but it's very clear that we will end up using ZKP or at least zero knowledge based like sort of solutions, right, for the end customers usage. What we're not going to use zero knowledge for is definitely how the data is being processed, how the data is being shared, how the data is being validated and being transferred to our sort of corporate or model training customers. I think that ZKPA, due to various reasons, has certain constraints that make it very useful for digital identity, but again, it does not really function very well for sort of large-scale data usage or large-scale data compression sort of problems that we have. But I think, again, as time goes by, I think ZKP will become more ubiquitous, and there's no reason why we wouldn't end up using ZKP very soon as well.
Thank you so much. This takes us to the next segment, which is tokenization and real-world asset integration. So, as you know, at XDC, that's what we are doing, or we are trying to do, which is bringing real-world assets onto the blockchain via tokenization. But obviously, since you guys have a lot of information about data and about tokenizing data, may I ask you, how does tokenizing data ensure immutability and security on chain?
So the thing is that I think the RWA tokenization process has been underway for the last couple of years, and I think it's accelerated over the last few years. And congratulations to XDC to having sort of put together that actually works, because it is hard to get it to work at the end of the day. I think a lot of the sort of underlying technology with real world assets is to do with how the legal binding works between the digital contract and the underlying sort of physical contract. Like that is the real challenge. And from our perspective, what we have understood, and as we build it, is that we are essentially also building some form of a digital RWA. That's my understanding. And however, we don't have the same problem as a lot of physical assets have, right? Essentially, you need glue, right? And you need legal glue, right? we're not trying to solve the legal glue problem. At least we don't have to solve it for now, because what we are saying is that, you know what, you have the data, it's your ownership, you upload it, you own it, here is the micro license, here is the aggregated form of these sort of data points, and here is the model trainer who's willing to pay money to buy the data and do this. This is the flow, right? The interesting bit is that, however, I do feel that we would do something like XDC going forward if essentially we were looking at, let's say, 3D scanning of real physical asset and then sort of taking it on chain. Yes, I do see huge sort of potential for doing things like that, which again might require the legal glue or might not require the legal glue. There's a difference between selling like complete land blocks on chain versus sort of 3D scanning a statue and uploading the 3D scan mesh data on the chain. I mean, again, the interesting bit is that I think we've reached this crazy point in terms of where technology is, where the laws need to handle this sort of like, value shift. Right from like the statue or the piece of land to how it looks on chain, how it's becoming a part of the larger DeFi ecosystem. I think it's crazy. It's amazing. But yeah, I think that we would end up doing things like that, and I think that would require a layer where this would do that. The interesting bit is that the immutability bit for us is essentially uniqueness of data. The question to be answered here is that, let's say you generated a whole bunch of data from ChatGPT and uploaded it on IPTO AI. Does it need to be immutable if it's the same block of data that you've uploaded? I don't think so, right? So the question of immutability sort of changes even after post-tokenization if there is no uniqueness to that particular entity or even the digital entity, right? So the way I would answer is that in most RWA cases, at least in the physical RWA case, it might make sense because you have physical coordinates or you might have sort of structural details that will lead to the connection into the digital world by anchoring it in something. But when it comes to information, for us, all we really care about is is the information unique enough? And if it's unique enough, is it interesting enough, right? And that's where the two sort of thing starts for us. Of course, the data uploaded we can say it's immutable just because somebody's uploaded some data, we'll say, oh, wow, the data is immutable. But is it truly valuable? Is it truly that valuable to say that, it's immutably valuable? I think those are interesting questions to ask. But the rest of it is the more interesting things to answer.
For sure. This has piqued my interest a lot, especially your idea about scanning something and putting it up,
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to add to what Dipankar already talked about. Of course, for us, like he already mentioned, like we are looking at IPs and digital data, where of course this real world in the traditional physical sense doesn't really come in. But of course, like it's IP and what our creativity is also kind of like a real world asset in that sense of like meaning there is something real about human creativity, so to say, whatever with our mind as well. And of course, like I think an interesting sort of take on that would be like if you segue this into health, then it becomes like super interesting and crazy as well, because now we are looking at a lot of health data being used in AI as well. So there, of course, I think that whole traditional like happening with, let's say, the usual RWA case and that physical and legal glue side of things, that'll come into picture in the digital realm a lot more as well, because that's where it sort of like gets connected very physically.
I'll give a very simple example, right? Yeah. You have a car, you have dashcam data. What's the dashcam data worth? It's worth something to someone who's training on Indian roads, right? But if you were going to use the same dashcam data from, let's say, UK or US or more sort of structured places where there's no variability on the road, maybe it does not have that much value. The interesting bit is that a lot of the underlying infrastructure variation in the data makes it original, makes it different, makes it more valuable, less valuable. But again, question of asking value is very important, even in the RWA case and so on and so forth. So I think there's like a intersectionality between RWA, digital assets, and also sort of looking at how deep in overall works, right? So there are all these sort of intersectional questions that come up. But that's the interesting part, right? I don't think, again, everything has to be seen in absolute isolation. I think everything just sort of comes together, which allows one to play off the other and scale up the ecosystem. But I think at this point of time, something like the blockchain does require a more fundamental user use case. And I think that the user use case has to be very, very simplified. And we feel that, at least I personally feel that this is like an extremely simplified way of getting the message across to everyone, right? And once this starts then doing RWA on a platform like this or doing something a bit more complex on their platform like this becomes a lot easier. Like people can suddenly start putting up all kinds of other things for sale, for AI data training, or for I don't know what else people want to do. It's crazy, right? I mean, people just want to do stuff. We have to find a way of giving them tools to do stuff.
So yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy that you guys said all of this in the last few seconds, because my next segment, which is compliance, regulation, and enterprise adoption. So how do Web3 projects navigate GDPR, India's DPDP bill, and US regulations?
I think that there's a lot being said about regulations, and especially data privacy seems to be a jurisdictional issue across specific sort of large economies, right? And small economies tend to copy the same sort of bills and then sort of modify them. That's how the trend has been. The larger question to ask is that what is the intent of the companies that are trying to sell user data or at times transact user data, right? And those processes have been extremely unclear in the Web2, which means that a lot of Web2 companies have centralized databases which are closed, so you can't really know what they're doing with what, right? How they're storing the data, are they doing something else? The interesting bit is that with Web3, a lot of the sort of data storage and a lot of the data aspect should be on chain. Again, everything is a should, right? And that should lead to clear transparency in terms of how data and the data flow happens from the user perspective. The user should be able to trace the data flowing across the system. It's of course not true today, but I think as more technology emerges, ZK happens, a whole bunch of things happen, I think it'll become very easy for the user to trace their data's life cycle, right, without having to recourse to complex or having to depend on governments to come up with data privacy, right? You should be able to understand what happened to your data, what's happened, where is it showing up, why are you seeing this ad, what's going on. A lot of it should have been done at the Web2 level long back, right? But it's clearly a geopolitical issue. It's clearly an issue where some countries want to keep the data of other countries and do things, and it's just what it is, right? It is, if somebody is more powerful, if you end up using that country's technology, I mean, your data will end up with them and they'll do what they want to do, and that's the way it's played out. But it doesn't have to be like this. I think Web3 allows an exit for all of us to go towards a more sort of global view of a more global humanistic view of how data should work, and why not, right? The larger problem for most Web3 projects are that I don't think they are, I mean, if the intent is correct, they would at least honestly write it clearly to the user that these are laws that you might end up violating, or these are laws we might end up violating, right? But in many cases, I think if they are being upfront, they should basically make it very obvious for the user to see how the data is being used. And when I say user data, I'm talking about analytics data that's generated by the user. I'm talking about on-chain data, transaction data for the user, data that the user uploads, where does it reside, what does it say, and then of course downstream usage of the data. Is it being sold to someone, knowingly, unknowingly? Those things should be taken care of. But again, these are very, very simple concerns. We can complicate it by saying that there's some law sitting in some jurisdiction which is going to apply and to do 500 things. But that's only when you are centralized now. All the laws apply in the land that you are operating a service from. So, and we have not even got into talking about VAT, GST, and taxes because you're paying service. So, yeah,
never mind.
I mean, it's hard to keep up, man. Like having spent so much time in this space and having worked with different jurisdictions, different companies in different countries, it's beyond a point of time. If you're building something, I think like Dipankar rightly mentioned, like intent has to be pure. Anyways, it's decentralized, more open platform. So essentially, in principle, we are doing the right thing. If you're doing the right thing as a builder, if your intent is right, so I think that should take care of the rest of the stuff. And then of course there are of course like legal experts and people who keep navigating these changes. But you know how it's been, like if you're anyone building in Web3, different laws, different countries, and it keeps changing every other month. I mean, you can't really build if you worry too much about them. So keep it simple and yeah, keep it more open, and the intent has to be good. I think that's all.
I completely agree with you guys. So as long as your intent is good, you'll find a way to, make sure that the people using your products are safe and, and within this scheme of whatever laws are or whatever frameworks are around. So yeah. So what's the biggest challenge in getting enterprises to trust on-chain data solutions?
I don't think there is any challenge, because from most sort of corporates or large companies, right, what do they really need if you think about it, right? They want to make sure that they're not on the wrong side of the law. Exactly. And of course, they want to make money by doing something, or they want to save money by doing something in most cases also. The thing that I think we are thinking incorrectly is that they are not going to operate outside of the jurisdictional challenges that they might face, which means that they want to pay in XYZ, get paid in XYZ, right? In many cases, they want some sort of legal assurances. That again takes us back to why something like the RWA companies might exist, right? You need legal glue in many cases to make sure that larger entities can interact with smaller entities. But again, this is not a Web3 specific problem. If you have a small Web2 company that goes and talks to a very large company and tries to sell them something or buy something, it's the same problem, right? It doesn't really change fundamentally. What, however, does change is that if you want to get them to understand on-chain, off-chain, sometimes they just don't want to care about on-chain, off-chain, right? They want a solution that protects them legally from something, helps them make more money somewhere. And from our perspective, all the people who would work with us would want more data for training. They don't care if it's on-chain. Right? They want to pay the people or buy those licenses. They don't care if it's on-chain. So they would want a PDF which says, oh, this is all legal, kosher, everything is good. Here's a PDF and people have signed up on it. And that's the way the business has to work, right? I mean, I don't go trying to buy a car, trying to understand why the internal combustion engine works. I'm very happy the internal combustion engine works, and sometimes the electric engine also works. Maybe it works like a golf cart's engine, very good. But at the end of the day, I want to buy a car, and as an entity, I want the entire car to work the way it should work. I don't want to understand more of it. So do the corporates really want to understand what is on-chain? I don't think so, no. I think it's a pointless exercise beyond a certain level.
Yeah, I agree. So are we seeing institutional interest in decentralized data ownership as of now, or are we still like very early?
I think we're early for sure. I think the issue is that they do buy on-chain data. It's absolutely true, but they buy for DeFi. They buy for all kinds of sort of financial related things, right? They have to do it. If you want to operate on a decentralized exchange, or you want to do any of these things in DeFi, you have to have data access, and there are data providers who provide that access. So that doesn't go away. But for on-chain data, right, for specifically solutions like us, has there been precedents where people have used this? No, I don't think so. Not at the scale that we are proposing, right? And also, it's very unclear why this has to be pushed as an on-chain thing. I would rather say that yes, on-chain verification needs to happen. In certain cases, you might even have ZK proofs in many cases. But I don't see a direct correlation of end sort of larger customers trying to understand what is on-chain again, right? Which again brings back to the same question, right? You don't need to understand on-chain. You're buying something, just buy it. It's good. Yeah, I paid with USDC. Nowadays, USDC and US dollars are like directly convertible. Why would you even think about it? Just goes to a USDC pool, sorted. Don't think of too much about it. All those rails exist. We live in fantastic times when it comes to doing these things. You couldn't have done a lot of these things that easily and in a regulated fashion, but now you can. So why even you don't need to place no smoke and mirrors with the end customer anymore. They can just pay and buy stuff.
So essentially, like Dipankar mentioned, like, our solution is not necessarily like a on-chain solution to something which is already solved. It's not like that. In AI, how AI is evolving, this solution solves a lot of things with that. The whole economic aspect, the whole training aspect, large enterprises getting access to this data. The solution actually implements blockchain. We implement blockchain to build this solution, but the solution itself is what's needed for the large enterprises. Like again, like it doesn't really matter whether it's on-chain, off-chain. But the good thing is blockchain actually does solve some of the biggest problems with AI training, and that's what we are doing here. But it is not a blockchain problem we are trying to solve, but blockchain is the solution, which is like part of the solution to this problem.
I think you guys have made it very clear. Thank you so much. Anyways, we are going into our next segment, which is Web3 adoption and challenges. So the first question is, why hasn't Web3 data ownership seen mass adoption yet?
I think it was not so important earlier. There's always a technology sort of curve with time which keeps on forming with different technologies and its adoption and awareness, or sort of like fundamental infrastructural pieces which need to come together at the right time. So I think now is the time when it's all coming together. So I think we are approaching that inflection point, and yeah, we'll solve it with IPTO. Pretty much we are on the way to solve this year.
I think that one of the biggest reasons it has not happened is because there is not enough UI UX improvements that have happened to make it easier for the end user to use it. And when I say, I'm not talking about like transactions, I'm not talking about BlackRock giving ETFs and stuff like that, right? That's all like a very sort of marginal population, like sort of having access, ubiquitous access. And we are talking about couple of billion users coming on chain and doing things. I think the next few years might be the actual time when a billion users actually come on this chain, and something like us would basically be the vector of growth. And I think we can genuinely provide the clear path in terms of adoption. Of course, the technology has to continue to be simplified for the end consumer for their perceived value and so on and so forth. I think those things are happening. I don't think we have done them, but there are a lot of other teams that are doing great work at doing that. I think our job as a company at the end of the day is to solve for a very specific thing and a very, very glaring gap in the market. We are not here to announce like, you know what, we're building the next CK processor or something like that. There are many teams again which are much more well suited to build those things. We are again a team that is hyper focused on using really fundamentally important technology that can become ubiquitous for everyone. So I think this is the next few years when data happens all over the place. We can see that, and we believe we would be one of the teams that will make it happen.
I'm sure, I mean, you guys seem to be knowing what you guys are doing, and like I've learned so much from you guys in just the last 1.5 hours, and thank you so much for all of the information. But this segment has more of the generalized questions so that you as data experts can answer some of these questions on a Web3 or general front. So my next question is, what role does decentralized governance play in maintaining trust over user data?
So I think that decentralized governance is again more reflective of the emerging sort of like, Web3 culture, right? Which means that the owners are from the set of users themselves. Sometimes, in many cases, the users have the ability to vote up certain things, vote down certain things about how the system might work. I think this is truly like a true implementation of the republic and various democratic processes, right? Well, how will it help, right? I think the biggest thing that will change is that there can be certain level of fairness in deciding what people get as a part of the economic process that this creates. I think people should also be able to, it's like setting the rate of a bank or the rate of interest and essentially how the tokenomics might work, who earns, how much are we selling it at. Should we fire the marketing team because they're incompetent? Maybe we should fire the founders. I don't know, right? There are many questions that might crop up, right? But essentially weeding out inefficiency in the system by using certain mechanics. Of course, all these things can be misused. There's no doubt about it, like any process. But again, there are certain questions which I definitely think should be made public and be done by the public. And at relative scale, I would suggest that such models should be completely democratic, which means that select the leaders, do whatever you want, run it the way you want, right? If you want to break it and then do something else, do that. But that's the choice, right? But I think it requires a certain level of protection and maturity before those processes are fully implemented. That's
100% agree with you.
It doesn't need to happen on day zero. It needs to happen when there's a cohesive set of people who are willing to run the show. And then if there is a better set of cohesive people who can run the show, they should do it. That's the way it is. Right? I'm all for Darwinism when it comes to these things. Please, the best people should run the system the way it should work. I think rent seeking also has its place. Of course, as founders, we would want to rent seek. Why not, right? But again, even that should have its upper bound. Nothing should be forever, and there should be a limit on everything, right? So I think greed is good, but infinite greed is too, right? So all of those things are fine. I'm in support of these things, capitalism and everything, but we can do it till a point where it make sense, right? After a point, it'll just stop making sense. It's just absurd, right? And it's a mockery of the people who are a part of the process. It should not become a mockery at any point, not of us or not of them. So again, for me, intent is very important.
Like how Mark Zuckerberg wants to fight Elon Musk in a jiu-jitsu.
But the joke is on us.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
joke is not on them. I think it's an insult to us. I don't think they think it's a joke, but they know that they can get away with anything, or they can make whatever rubbish. It's insane. I mean, I don't know how we are rationalizing all of this as a society, but it's fine. I mean, that's okay. I mean, that's what power does, right? When power has its own manifestation, right? But I suspect that if there's a chance of making systems a bit cleaner, it's not as if I don't want to make money. It's not as if I don't want to be rich and powerful. I think we should all desire all of those things. There's nothing wrong in desiring those things. But if it makes a mockery of the system, breaks the fundamental core of the system, then something is wrong, right? So from my perspective, if you can make it into a very large organization, decentralized organization that can perform at a global scale and achieve global things for all of us, wow, I'll be very proud of what we've achieved. It doesn't mean I should rent seek forever. No, at no point should that be allowed. I think there's something morally incorrect there. So
Yeah. So, I mean, my next question to you is, identity, like your licenses, your Aadhaar card, your passport, all of these things, they're becoming into DIDs, which are, decentralized identities. Will decentralized identity become the norm, or will centralized companies push back? What is your opinion on this?
I think this is a very important question to answer from the perspective of, again, what Balaji has talked about in the nation-state construct and what we're talking in terms of identity and national identity construct, right? It is very important to address the fact that decentralized digital identities are not only here to stay. I think everybody is going to become a part of some clan, some subgroup, some larger community, which is going to be independent of their countries. And they're even maybe they will want to pay taxes for those communities, the larger community that they exist in. Where you stay might not end up determining what tax you pay or how you want to interact with the larger communities online and so on and so forth. I think that future is going to happen, right? It should happen, right? Maybe global politics does not look like that today because it's again becoming very insular, right? But the good part is that I think it has entered our consciousness. We are unwilling to maybe get locked down anymore. I think we want more mobility. We want to go across the Silk Route the way our ancestors did, and maybe take boats and go across various parts of Southeast Asia, hop from one city to the next. And these are all choices that we should have. I think it's not incorrect to want mobility, because mobility always allowed for social mobility. It allows you to have different classes of incomes, different classes of talents, to go across the world, find their space. I think nation state is a relatively new construct. It can't survive in its current form for too long because it just causes distortions, economic distortions. It has caused enough economic distortions. So I'm sure your ancestors did not come from the place where you are at. Neither did mine. I'm sure Krishna's either, right? We're all migrants, and we'll continue to be migrants, and we'll find new opportunities from our tribes globally. And it should not be only for a select few who can travel and spend money, because this was always ubiquitous, right? People could just take a bag and then go to any place, take a now, go across the river and then go to some other 5 villages and make space for themselves. And we should make it possible. Yeah, why not? I think it will lead to more growth and for everyone, and less unhappiness for a lot of people, right? So what I really do believe in is that a lot of the sort of artificial constructs will break down, and DID will exist in DID is nothing but a outcome of national borders not being able to contain human beings within them.
Yeah.
Right. People just want to break out, and they just go it's like we can't do it in the physical layer. Let's just go and cross over to some other ocean after. It's just a thing, right? I mean, what limits you here can't limit you there, right? And DID will soon become a way of trying to limit that also one day. So
I'd like to add to it a couple of lines which I written in Hindi. जिंदगी का मजा रास्तों में है, मंजिलों में है नहीं कुछ रखा सिवाय दूसरे रास्तों के. भाई ये सब लोग ग्लोबल यात्री हैं. चलता रहता है. Nation state, anyways, are not gonna be so relevant. I mean, it is not for the whole, if you look at the digital nomad movement, which started in a decade ago, couple of decades ago. I mean, we are all moving towards that pretty much. So let's not get bounded.
Yeah.
I would even position it another way. I'm saying that we are not bounded. I'm saying that this is completely made up. And the crazy bit is that only two parts of the population actually behave normally: the extreme elite or the extremely like the folks who don't have means or access. They can break those laws without thinking about consequences, right? So this is the only two parts which are fundamentally mobile. Everybody in the middle is stuck in this weird place where they feel that they are breaking laws online, laws offline. Should I do this? Should I not do this? It's become this mess, right? And it should not be so messy. So my take is that we have to work towards building a future which is not, of course, anarchy, but which definitely leads to more sort of structural abilities for us to find our place in world, in the society, and how we can do things, right? And let all of us be honest with our intent and at least try to do it. Yeah, it is hard enough just to do the things that we love doing, but it should not be this hard to find your place. I think we made it very hard to find a place. It shouldn't be this hard.
I agree. I think we are blessed to somehow be here right now.
Exactly.
So, how do we balance privacy and compliance in an increasing regulated world?
I think that privacy and compliance, right, again apply broadly to larger Web2 companies. I think, again, if privacy concerns and compliance regulations are encoded within the contract itself, in many cases, right, the extreme level of accounting transparency should allow us to navigate this globally, right? It is very important to understand that the whole purpose of the whole blockchain movement, in my head, is to give clear access to everyone. That's the whole point. A nation state can access the data and see what was going on. An individual can do it. If the resolution is crazy, right?
What needs to change to make Web3 more accessible to everyday users and businesses?
Better UI UX. Not think about online off-ramping, on-ramping unless you're doing DeFi in some cases. I think USDC is doing fantastic work. I look at what USDC has done recently in terms of like the entire integration. I think Stripe has acquired a stablecoin and structured stablecoins which are backed by one-on-one. I think this is a great opportunity to sort of get businesses to using the blockchain without knowing that they're using blockchains. And I think these can provide for very clear sort of regulatory guardrails to do this business without really appearing to be on what was called the shady end of the business, right? And I think the good news is that all this has emerged in the last 6 months. And I think with the current sort of US government coming in, I think there's clear opportunity of doing the good bits of crypto really well, right? I mean, and it applies to business. I think this is the era when businesses can issue invoices in USDC. There's so much opportunity. It's like crazy opportunity to build really good, like, global businesses. And if you see the kind of cost reduction that comes by doing all this transaction on chain, it's insane. $10,000 versus $50 for doing, I think, $10 million worth of transaction. The transaction costs are going down drastically. So it's going to bring in a new era of B2B interactions online.
Yeah, I think XDC is in the right place right now to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we are complicated technical people inside and we like sort of wondering and solving these things, but I think sometimes the simpler fundamental things are the hardest to solve or the hardest to sort of execute, and that's what we are trying to do now in our journey.
I think that there are two ways of doing this. Either do more fundamental research in terms of how the blockchain might work and how we can scale the blockchain. But again, I think I would love to do that, but I would rather have to figure out how to, like, if I could get 1 billion users on the chain, that would be a much more interesting problem to solve for, because I think that really has fundamental implications as to how the world looks like. I think enough people are working on how to better the blockchain in their bedrooms, so I can't fight that one. So, yeah.
Perfect ending words for this conversation. Thank you both, Dipankar and Abhishek Krishna, for being part of this episode of XDC Podcast India. To our listeners, thank you for engaging with us on this high resolution exploration. Follow the XDC India podcast as we continue decoding Web3 through the lenses of theory, execution, and ecosystem intelligence. Until next time, build deliberately, think long, and stay decentralized.